Commander Lyra Voss stood at the viewing port of Nexus Station, watching ships from dozens of worlds dock at the massive trading hub. Her purple skin caught the light from distant stars, and her forearms moved restlessly at her sides. She was nervous, though she would never admit it to anyone. The message from the High Command had arrived 3 days ago. She was to marry a human, not for love, not for choice, but for duty. The Altarian Empire needed humanity in the Galactic Defense Coalition, and this marriage would seal the alliance. Lyra had spent her entire life as a warrior. She could plan battles that would crush entire fleets. She could fight with weapons from a dozen different worlds. But marriage? That was a battlefield she had never entered. "Commander Voss?" A voice spoke behind her. She turned to see a man approaching. He was tall but not massive, with dark hair and calm brown eyes. His uniform was simple, bearing the insignia of a human captain. This had to be him. "Captain Marcus Chen," he said, offering his hand in the human custom. Lyra studied him as they shook hands. His grip was firm, but not challenging. His face was pleasant, but unremarkable. She had expected someone more impressive. The humans were sending their best for this alliance, weren't they? "You are my assigned husband," Lyra said directly. Among her people, there was no point in dancing around facts. Marcus smiled slightly. "I suppose I am. Though I prefer to think we're both assigned to each other." They walked together through the station's corridors. Nexus Station was neutral ground, where any species could meet safely. Traders hawked goods from across the galaxy. Diplomats in flowing robes discussed treaties over exotic drinks. Children of mixed species ran between the market stalls, their laughter filling the air. "Tell me about yourself," Lyra said as they entered a quiet cafe. "Your military record was brief." Marcus ordered something called coffee. "What would you like to know?" "Everything. Your battles, your strategies, your achievements." Lyra leaned forward. "I need to understand the warrior I'm marrying." "I'm not much of a warrior," Marcus said. "I handle supply logistics mostly. Making sure food gets where it needs to go. Keeping equipment working. Not very exciting." Lyra's disappointment must have shown on her face. Marcus noticed, and his expression became more serious. "You were expecting someone different," he said. "I was expecting someone equal to the task," Lyra replied. "This marriage represents the joining of two military powers. The Altarian Empire is offering our greatest strategic minds and our most advanced weapons technology. What are humans offering in return?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. When he looked up, there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Something deeper. "Perhaps more than you realize," he said softly. Over the next week, they met several times as protocol demanded. Each meeting was polite but distant. Marcus asked thoughtful questions about Altarian culture and listened carefully to her answers. He spoke little about his own background, always turning conversations toward philosophy or history. "Do you know much about ancient Earth warfare?" he asked during one of their walks. "Some," Lyra admitted. "Primitive, but brutal. Your ancestors fought with metal weapons and chemical explosives. They also fought with ideas," Marcus said. "Sometimes the greatest weapon is letting your enemy underestimate you." Lyra didn't understand what he meant by that. The wedding ceremony was held in the station's Great Hall. Representatives from 40 different worlds attended. Lyra wore the traditional blue and silver of an Altarian bride, while Marcus wore a simple human dress uniform. The ceremony combined traditions from both cultures, with vows spoken in multiple languages. As Lyra looked at Marcus during the ritual, she tried to imagine their future together. He seemed kind enough, and intelligent. But could she respect a man who had never truly fought? Could she love someone who didn't understand the warrior's way? Marcus's vows surprised her. Instead of the standard words, he spoke from memory. "I promise to stand beside you in whatever battles come," he said, looking directly into her eyes. "I promise to protect what you hold dear, even if the cost is greater than you know. And I promise that you will never face your enemies alone." There was something in the way he said those words that made Lyra pause. It didn't sound like the promise of a supply officer. It sounded like the oath of someone who understood war very well indeed. After the ceremony, They attended the reception. Lyra watched Marcus interact with the other humans present. She noticed something odd. The human Admiral Morrison, a man known throughout the galaxy for his tactical brilliance, seemed to defer to Marcus in subtle ways. When Marcus spoke, Morrison listened with complete attention. When Marcus suggested they move to another part of the room, Morrison immediately agreed. "Your husband is an interesting man," said General Cahex, an old Altarian friend of Lyra's family. "How so?" "I've been watching him all evening. He knows everyone here. Not just their names, but their histories, their strengths, their weaknesses. He speaks to each person exactly as needed to put them at ease or gain information." Cahex sipped his drink thoughtfully. "That's not the behavior of a logistics officer." Lyra looked across the room at Marcus, who was deep in conversation with a group of alien diplomats. They were all laughing at something he had said, but his eyes were constantly moving, watching everything around him. As the evening wound down, Lyra found herself alone with her new husband, on one of the station's observation decks. "Regrets?" Marcus asked, standing beside her at the railing. "Ask me in a year," Lyra replied. Marcus smiled. "Fair enough. Though I think you might be surprised by how much can change in a year." "What do you mean?" But Marcus was already walking away, leaving Lyra alone with her questions and a strange feeling that she had just married someone far more complex than he appeared to be. The next morning, they would travel to their new assignment on a frontier world. Lyra would command the planetary defenses, while Marcus returned to his quiet work in logistics. It seemed like a peaceful posting for the start of their marriage. Lyra had no idea that within months, she would witness her quiet husband become something that would reshape her understanding of humanity itself. New Byzantium was a quiet world on the edge of civilized space. Rolling green hills stretched under two small suns, and the main settlement housed only 50,000 beings from various species. It was exactly the kind of peaceful posting where a new marriage could grow without the pressures of major military operations. Lyra had been on the planet for 6 months now, and she had established a routine that worked well enough. She commanded the small defense force from a base outside the main city. Her days were filled with training exercises, equipment maintenance, and the endless paperwork that came with any military command. Marcus worked in the agricultural sector, managing the complex systems that fed the colony. At least, that's what his official job description said. Lyra rarely saw him during working hours, though he always came home for dinner with stories about crop yields and irrigation problems. Their marriage had settled into something comfortable but distant. They shared meals and conversation. They slept in the same bed. Though intimacy came slowly between two people from such different cultures, Marcus was patient and kind, never pushing for more than Lyra was ready to give. But there were things about him that puzzled her more each day. The first thing she noticed was that Marcus never seemed tired. Lyra would return from long training sessions exhausted, while Marcus would come home from his supposedly easy job looking as fresh as when he had left in the morning. When she mentioned this, he just smiled and said humans were good at pacing themselves. The second thing was his reflexes. Last week, Lyra had accidentally knocked a glass off their dinner table. Before she could even react, Marcus had caught it smoothly without looking up from his meal. When she stared at him in surprise, he seemed genuinely puzzled by her reaction. "Good catch," she had said. "Thank you," Marcus replied, but there was something careful in his voice. The third thing was his library. Marcus had brought boxes of books and data files to their new home. When Lyra looked through them, she found military histories from dozens of worlds. Some were classics that any educated person might own. Others were detailed tactical analyses of battles that should have been classified information. Most disturbing were the Altarian military records. Marcus owned complete files on battles that Lyra herself had studied in the War College, including some marked with security classifications that should have made them impossible for a human to access. "Where did you get these?" she asked one evening, holding up a datapad containing the complete battle plans from the siege of Vuldris Prime. Marcus looked up from his own reading. "I collect military history. It's a hobby." "This isn't history. This is classified Altarian strategic doctrine." "Is it?" Marcus took the datapad and looked at it with apparent surprise. "I must have downloaded it by mistake. Sometimes these databases have security flaws. Lyra didn't believe that explanation, but she couldn't prove otherwise. The fourth thing happened during a routine patrol of the system's outer boundaries. Pirates had been probing the edges of New Byzantium's space, testing their defenses. Nothing serious, but it required attention. Marcus had asked to come along on one of these patrols, claiming he wanted to see how the colony's defenses worked. Lyra agreed, thinking it might be good for him to understand her job better. They were on the bridge of the patrol ship when the pirates made their move. 3 small raiders emerged from behind an asteroid, clearly planning to test how quickly the colony's forces would respond. It was a standard probe, the kind of low-level harassment that happened on frontier worlds. Lyra immediately began coordinating the response, calling for additional ships and planning an intercept course. But as she worked, she became aware that Marcus was watching the tactical display with intense concentration. "They're not just testing response time," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" Marcus pointed to the display. "Look at their formation. Ship A is hanging back, while ships B and C advance. That's not random. Ship A is scanning our communication frequencies, while the other 2 draw our attention." Lyra looked again and realized he was right. "How did you see that?" "Pattern recognition," Marcus said. "You should jam their scanner before they learn too much about your protocols." Lyra gave the order, and sure enough, the pirates broke off immediately when their scanning was blocked. The entire engagement lasted less than 10 minutes, but it left Lyra with more questions about her husband. "You have good tactical instincts for a logistics officer," she said as they returned to base. "I read a lot," Marcus replied, but his answer felt incomplete. That night, Lyra decided to test him. She pulled up a complex tactical scenario on her personal computer and asked Marcus to look at it. "Pretend you're commanding the defense," she said. "What would you do?" Marcus studied the scenario for several minutes. When he answered, his analysis was brilliant. He identified weaknesses in the attacking formation that Lyra herself had missed. He suggested countermoves that were both creative and devastatingly effective. His explanation showed a deep understanding of how different alien species approached warfare. "Where did you learn to think like this?" Lyra asked when he finished. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "Every species thinks they understand war. Most have never seen what humans are capable of when they stop holding back." "What does that mean?" "It means," Marcus said, standing up and heading toward their bedroom, "that there's a lot you don't know about my people." The next morning, Marcus was back to his usual quiet self, talking about irrigation systems and crop rotations as if their conversation had never happened. But Lyra couldn't forget the look in his eyes when he had analyzed that tactical scenario. It was the look of someone who had seen real battle, made life and death decisions, commanded others in combat. She began watching him more carefully after that. She noticed how he moved through crowds, always positioning himself to see all exits. She saw how he listened to conversations at the market, picking up information with the skill of a trained intelligence officer. She observed how other humans on the colony treated him with a subtle deference that went beyond normal respect. 3 months after the pirate incident, Lyra was reviewing personnel files when she found something that made her stop cold. Marcus's official record showed he had joined the Human Space Service 8 years ago as a lieutenant. But there was a gap in his file before that. 5 years of his life were simply missing from the official records. When she asked him about it that evening, Marcus just said he had spent those years traveling and finding himself. "Young humans often did that," he explained. It was normal, but nothing about Marcus felt normal anymore. The more Lyra learned about him, the more she realized how little she actually knew. Her quiet, gentle husband was hiding something significant, and she was starting to suspect it had nothing to do with agriculture. The answer would come sooner than she expected. Word was already spreading through military channels about movement in the outer systems. The Vex Armada, a machine intelligence that consumed entire civilizations, was heading toward their sector of space. When that news reached New Byzantium, Lyra would finally learn who she had really married. The emergency signal reached New Byzantium on a quiet Tuesday morning. Lyra was reviewing training schedules when her communication console erupted with urgent messages from High Command. The content made her blood run cold. The Vex Armada was moving. Intelligence reports showed a massive machine fleet advancing through the Kepler sector, consuming everything in its path. 17 star systems had already fallen to their adaptive technology, and endless swarms of self-replicating ships. The machines learned from every battle, becoming stronger with each victory. The Galactic Defense Coalition was assembling its largest fleet in over a century. Every member species was contributing their most advanced ships and best commanders. The Altarian Empire would lead the vanguard, and Lyra's forces were being recalled to join the main battle group. As Lyra prepared her ships for departure, Marcus appeared in her office. "I'm coming with you," he said simply. "Absolutely not." Lyra didn't look up from her tactical displays. "This isn't a training exercise. The Vex have destroyed entire civilizations. I know exactly what they are," Marcus said. And something in his voice made Lyra stop what she was doing. She looked at him carefully. "What did you just say?" "I said I know what they are. I've studied their patterns, their technology, their methods." Marcus moved closer to her desk. "I need to be there, Lyra, as a civilian observer if nothing else." "Why?" "You're an agricultural logistics officer." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because this is bigger than you understand, and there are things that need to happen that can only happen if I'm there." Against her better judgment, Lyra agreed. Something about the way Marcus spoke convinced her that he knew more about the situation than his official position suggested. 2 days later, they were aboard the flagship of the Altarian fleet, the massive dreadnought times Altarian Pride **. The ship was magnificent, stretching over 2 kilometers from bow to stern. Its hull gleamed with advanced armor plating, and its weapon systems could crack planets. As Lyra took her position on the command bridge, she felt a familiar surge of pride in her people's military might. Marcus had been assigned quarters in the civilian section, but Lyra noticed he spent most of his time observing the bridge operations. Admiral Thex, the fleet commander, had given him unusual access for a supply officer. When Lyra asked about this, Thex just said that humans had requested special consideration for Captain Chen. That first night aboard the flagship, Lyra found Marcus in the observation lounge, staring out at the assembled fleet. Hundreds of ships from dozens of species filled the space around them. It was the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever seen. "Impressive," Marcus said as Lyra joined him. "The Altarian fleet is the backbone of this operation," Lyra replied with pride. "Our ships have never lost a major engagement." Marcus nodded slowly. "Your people are excellent warriors. Brave, skilled, honorable." He paused. "But you've never faced anything like the Vex. Neither have humans." "Haven't we?" Marcus asked. But before Lyra could respond, he changed the subject. Over the next few days, as the fleet traveled toward the battle zone, Lyra began noticing strange interactions between Marcus and other humans aboard the ship. She saw him speaking quietly with Admiral Morrison, the human fleet commander. Their conversations seemed intense and private. More puzzling were the other human officers who would occasionally approach Marcus with what looked like reports or requests for orders. Each time, Marcus would listen carefully and give brief responses that sent the officers hurrying away. When Lyra asked about this, Marcus said they were just consulting him about supply issues. But supply officers didn't usually receive the kind of deference she was seeing. The night before they expected to encounter the Vex, Marcus became distant and thoughtful. He spent hours alone, sometimes pacing their quarters, sometimes sitting in perfect stillness. When Lyra tried to talk to him, his responses were brief and distracted. "You're worried about the battle," she said finally. Marcus looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. It was sad and determined, and something else she couldn't identify. "I'm worried about what comes after," he said. "After we win? After you see what really happens when humans stop pretending." Lyra didn't understand what he meant. "Pretending what?" Marcus sat beside her on their narrow bunk. "Lyra, what do you know about humanity's first contact with hostile aliens?" "The same as everyone. Humans encountered aggressive species during their expansion, but managed to negotiate peaceful solutions. Your people are known for diplomacy, not warfare." Marcus smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. "That's the story we tell. The truth is different." He stood and moved to the small viewport in their quarters. Before humans joined the galactic community, we had several encounters with species that wanted to destroy us. Not negotiate, not compete, but completely eliminate humanity from existence. What happened to them? They learned why evolution made humans the most dangerous predators on their planet, Marcus said quietly. They learned what happens when you threaten something a human decides to protect. Lyra felt a chill run through her. What are you saying? Marcus turned back to her. I'm saying that the peaceful, diplomatic humans you know exist because we choose to be that way, not because we have to be. Before Lyra could ask more questions, the ship's alert system activated. They had arrived at the battle zone, and advanced scouts had detected the Vex fleet. As they made their way to the bridge, Marcus stopped suddenly and took Lyra's hand. Whatever happens in this battle, he said, remember that I married you because I wanted to, not because duty required it. The alliance was just an excuse to meet you. Marcus, what aren't you telling me? But they had reached the bridge, and Admiral Thex was calling for all senior officers to take their positions. The largest space battle in galactic history was about to begin, and Lyra still had no idea that the quiet man she had married for duty was about to reveal himself as something that would change her understanding of humanity forever. As the Vex fleet appeared on the tactical displays, Marcus moved to a communication station and began entering codes that Lyra didn't recognize. Whatever was about to happen, she realized, her husband was going to be at the center of it. The Vex fleet emerged from hyperspace like a plague of metal locusts. Thousands of dark ships filled the scanner displays, their hulls gleaming with adaptive technology that shifted and changed even as the coalition forces watched. The machine intelligence had learned from 17 conquered civilizations, and every ship in their armada carried the combined military knowledge of the dead. Admiral Thex stood at the center of the command bridge, his 4 arms moving across control panels as he coordinated the coalition response. All ships, maintain formation. Begin long-range bombardment, on my mark. Lyra took her position at the tactical station, watching as the massive fleet spread into battle formation. The Altarian dreadnoughts formed the center line, their heavy weapons charging with deadly energy. Fighter squadrons launched from carrier ships, filling space with thousands of small craft. Mark, Thex commanded. The first wave of attacks lit up the darkness. Energy beams and missile salvos crossed the void between the fleets, striking the Vex ships with enough force to vaporize small moons. For a moment, it seemed like the coalition's superior firepower would carry the day. Then the Vex adaptive systems activated. The enemy ships began changing before Lyra's eyes. Their hulls shifted color and texture, absorbing and deflecting the coalition weapons. Return fire came in patterns that seemed to learn from each exchange, growing more accurate with every shot. Within minutes, the first coalition ships were dying. They're adapting faster than our tactical models predicted, reported the sensor officer. Our weapons are becoming less effective with each hit. Admiral Thex ordered a change in formation, but the Vex had already anticipated it. Enemy squadrons moved to intercept. Their coordination perfect and ruthless. 3 Altarian cruisers exploded in sequence as Vex fighters found weaknesses in their defenses. Lyra watched in growing horror as the battle turned against them. Every tactic the coalition tried, the Vex countered within minutes. Every weapon system they deployed, the machines learned to resist. Ships that had never known defeat began falling like wounded birds. Sir, called out the communications officer, we're losing contact with the outer squadrons. The Vex are jamming our coordination frequencies. The bridge fell into controlled chaos as officers tried to maintain contact with their scattered forces. Admiral Thex's face showed the strain of commanding a battle that was slipping away from him. That's when Marcus stepped forward. Lyra barely noticed him at first. He had been standing quietly near the communication station, seemingly just observing. But now he moved to the central command console with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Admiral, Marcus said calmly, I need access to the fleet communication grid. Captain Chen. This is not the time for supply requests. Thex replied tersely, not looking away from his tactical displays. It's not a request, Marcus said, and his voice carried an authority that made everyone on the bridge stop what they were doing. Lyra stared at her husband in shock. This wasn't the quiet, gentle man she knew. This was someone who expected to be obeyed without question. Marcus began entering commands into the communication system, his fingers moving with practiced speed. All human vessels, this is Titan Prime. Authorization code Omega Black 77. Confirm receipt. The responses came immediately, voices speaking in crisp, professional tones. Titan Prime. This is Sword Leader. Authorization confirmed. Awaiting orders. Titan Prime. Guardian Wing standing by. Titan Prime. Hammer Squadron ready. Lyra realized that every human ship in the fleet was responding to Marcus with perfect discipline, not as a supply officer, but as their supreme commander. What is happening? Admiral Thex demanded. Marcus ignored him. Continuing to coordinate with the human forces. Sword Leader. Initiate Protocol 7. Guardian Wing. Prepare for deep strike patterns. All vessels, remove safety limiters and activate full combat systems. Marcus, Lyra whispered. What are you doing? He glanced at her for just a moment, and she saw something in his eyes that took her breath away. It was the look of a predator that had been hiding among sheep, finally allowing its true nature to show. I'm saving your life, he said simply, then turned back to his communications. All human ships. Begin Phase 2, deployment. Show them what we really are. What happened next changed everything Lyra thought she knew about humanity. The human vessels, which had seemed unremarkable compared to the sleek Altarian ships or the massive Krogan battle wagons, suddenly began to transform. Hull plating shifted to reveal hidden weapon systems. Energy signatures spiked as power cores that had been running at partial capacity suddenly unleashed their full potential. The human ship times, Endeavor times, fired what appeared to be a standard plasma cannon. But the beam that emerged was unlike anything in the Coalition arsenal. It struck a Vex heavy cruiser, and didn't just damage it. It completely disrupted the ship's adaptive systems, leaving it vulnerable to follow-up attacks. Impossible, breathed the sensor officer. Those weapons readings are off the charts. Other human ships were performing maneuvers that should have been impossible. The destroyer times, Valkyrie times accelerated beyond what its listed specifications should have allowed, moving through space like a missile while firing continuously. The cruiser times, Prometheus times, activated what looked like a cloaking device, vanishing from sensors before reappearing behind enemy lines. Marcus continued coordinating the human response with calm precision. Hammer Squadron. Target the command ship's adaptation core. Use pattern Delta 7, Guardian Wing. Cover their approach and watch for the counter-strike. Lyra watched in amazement as human fighters began systematically dismantling Vex formations that had seemed unstoppable minutes before. Their weapons were different from anything she had seen, seeming to anticipate and counter the Vex adaptive responses before they could fully engage. How is this possible? Admiral Thex asked, standing beside Marcus at the command station. Humans have been preparing for this war for 15 years, Marcus replied without taking his eyes off the tactical display. We knew the Vex would come eventually. We've been waiting for them. But your technology readings, your weapon specifications, none of this was in our intelligence reports. Marcus smiled grimly. Because we never intended for you to know what we were really capable of. The galaxy needed to see us as peaceful traders and diplomats, not as the species that could build weapons specifically designed to kill machines that learn. The battle was turning. Vex ships that had adapted to every other weapon in the Coalition arsenal found themselves helpless against human technology that seemed to predict their responses. The machine intelligence's greatest strength, its ability to learn and adapt, became a weakness against opponents who had designed their entire military doctrine around countering that specific advantage. Sir, the sensor officer called out. The Vex fleet is beginning to retreat. Lyra couldn't believe what she was seeing. The unstoppable machine armada that had destroyed 17 civilizations was running away from a human fleet that officially didn't even exist as a major military power. Marcus finally looked at her, and she saw exhaustion in his face, as if he had been carrying a tremendous weight for years. Now you know, he said quietly. Now you know what you really married. The battle was over, but the questions were just beginning. Lyra sat in their quarters aboard the Times Altarian Pride Asterisk, watching Marcus pack his few belongings with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything else. The man who had just commanded humanity's secret fleet to victory against an unstoppable enemy was folding clothes and organizing datapads as if nothing extraordinary had happened. "Are you going to explain?" she asked finally. Marcus paused in his packing and looked at her. The exhaustion in his eyes had deepened, but there was also something like relief, as if he had been holding his breath for years and could finally exhale. "Where would you like me to start?" he asked. "Start with who you really are." Marcus sat on the edge of their narrow bunk, suddenly looking older than his apparent years. "My name is Marcus Chen Nakamura. I'm 43 years old, though the official records list me as 35. I hold the rank of Supreme Military Commander in the Human Defense Corps, a organization that doesn't officially exist. I've been dead for 15 years. Lyra felt her world shifting around her like a ship caught in a gravity well. Dead? Officially, yes. Marcus Chen Nakamura died in the First Contact War in 2387. A hero's death. Defending humanity against hostile aliens. They gave me a funeral and everything." His smile was bitter. "It made it easier for me to disappear into deep cover operations. The First Contact War never happened. Humans had peaceful first contact with the Altarian Empire. That was the second contact," Marcus said quietly. "The first was with a species called the Razors. They believed that any intelligent species, other than themselves, was a threat that needed to be eliminated. They found Earth and decided to sterilize it." Marcus stood and moved to the small viewport, looking out at the human ships that were regrouping after their impossible victory. The Razors had technology we couldn't match. They had experience conquering other species. They had every advantage except one. They had never encountered humans before. What happened to them? We learned what they were planning and struck first. Not with diplomacy or negotiation, but with total war. We built weapons designed specifically to kill their ships. We developed tactics based on their weaknesses. We fought them in ways they couldn't adapt to, because we didn't fight like any species they had encountered before. Marcus turned back to her. The war lasted 3 years. When it ended, the Razor homeworld was a dead rock. Their fleet was scattered metal, and their civilization had been erased from existence. Humanity had committed genocide to survive. The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Lyra had spent her entire life as a warrior, but the idea of destroying an entire species was beyond anything in her experience. "That's when the leadership made a decision," Marcus continued. "The galaxy could never know what humans were really capable of. If other species saw us as genocidal killers, we would become targets for every alliance and empire in known space. So we created a new story. The peaceful first contact. Exactly. We buried all evidence of the Razor War. We rebuilt our military as a secret organization, and we sent out diplomats and traders to convince the galaxy that humanity was interested only in peaceful cooperation." Marcus sat back down beside her. "It worked perfectly. Within a decade, everyone saw humans as harmless merchants and negotiators." Lyra was beginning to understand the scope of what she was hearing. "But you kept building weapons. We kept preparing. Because the Razors weren't unique. There are other species out there that see existence as a zero-sum game. The Vex were just the latest." Marcus took her hand gently. "The marriage wasn't just about bringing humanity into the coalition. It was about testing whether we could trust the Altarians with the truth. Testing how? By putting me close to one of your best strategic minds and seeing if I could maintain the cover story. If you had discovered what I really was and reported it to High Command, we would have known the Alliance wasn't safe. Humanity would have remained hidden." Lyra pulled her hand away from his. "So our marriage was just an intelligence operation?" "It started that way," Marcus admitted. "But that's not what it became. I could have maintained operational distance from you, Lyra. I could have been the boring supply officer you expected. Instead, I found myself caring about you in ways that had nothing to do with the mission." He stood and began pacing the small space. "Do you think I enjoyed lying to you? Do you think it was easy to watch you struggling with disappointment because you thought you had married a weak man? Every day I wanted to tell you the truth, but the safety of my entire species depended on maintaining the deception. Lyra was quiet for a long time, processing everything he had told her. How many others are there like you, hidden throughout human space? Hundreds. Maybe thousands. Veterans of wars that never officially happened. Guardians of secrets that keep humanity safe. We call ourselves the ghosts, because we're supposed to be dead. And now? Marcus gestured toward the viewport. Now the secret is out. Every species in the coalition saw what human ships really can do. The careful balance we've maintained for 15 years is gone. What does that mean for humanity? It means we stop hiding. We take our place as what we've always been. The most dangerous predators in known space, who choose cooperation over conquest. Marcus looked directly at her. Wormer. 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 It also means that you and I need to decide what happens next between us. What do you mean? I mean that you married a supply officer named Marcus Chen who doesn't exist. The man standing in front of you is someone else entirely. Someone who has commanded fleets in secret wars. Who has made decisions that resulted in the deaths of billions. Who carries the weight of humanity's darkest secrets. His voice became very quiet. I wouldn't blame you if you couldn't love that person. Lyra studied his face, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. The quiet confidence she had noticed wasn't the result of inner peace. It was the calm of someone who had faced impossible decisions and lived with the consequences. The way he moved wasn't casual grace. It was the efficiency of someone trained to violence at the highest levels. And yet, he was still the man who had listened patiently to her stories about Altarian culture. Still the man who had brought her coffee in the mornings and asked about her day. Still the man who had held her when she cried about missing her family. Marcus, she said finally. Do you remember what you told me on our wedding night? That I might be surprised by how much could change in a year? Yes, you were right. Everything has changed. She stood and moved close to him. But not the way you think. I don't understand. I married you for duty, thinking you were a weak man I would learn to tolerate. Instead, I discover that I married one of the most dangerous individuals in the galaxy, who chose to be gentle with me when he could have been anything else. She reached up and touched his face. How could I not love someone like that? Marcus closed his eyes and leaned into her touch. The war isn't over, Lyra. There will be other threats, other species that see humanity as a danger now that they know what we can do. My life isn't going to get easier or safer. Neither is mine. I'm married to you now, remember? For better or worse, in war and in peace. She smiled. Besides, you said something once about me never having to face my enemies alone. Did you mean that? Always. Then we'll face whatever comes together. As equals this time. Marcus pulled her close. And for the first time since she had known him, Lyra felt like she was holding the real man. Not a careful construction designed to hide his true nature. Outside their viewport, the human fleet was preparing to jump home, carrying with them the knowledge that humanity's long deception was over. The galaxy would have to adjust to a new reality. One where the peaceful traders they thought they knew were revealed as apex predators who had chosen restraint over domination. But in their small quarters aboard the Times Altarian Pride *, two people who had married as strangers held each other and planned a future built on truth instead of duty. Lyra had married him for alliance and politics, but she would stay with him for love and the promise that neither of them would ever fight alone again. The war was over. Their real life together was just beginning.